Greetings and salutations to our fine podcast audience. Welcome to episode 237 of 3 Peas in a Pod.
We made it.
Ha ha! He's back.
I'm back. I'm here.
People who were watching already knew, but the listeners
They
were
hadn't
in
heard my
suspense.
voice yet. They didn't know.
Once again, last week we had a pregnant pause and you didn't fill it in.
Oh.
But now here you are.
I have returned.
We're so happy.
Charlie, reset the timer. Please.
That's right. Charlie, you're going to have to reset that timer or
Producer
we're going to go an hour and the people will hate us.
Yes. That's why I was paused because I was like, is Charlie going to remember that timer?
He won't. But we reminded him and
There's
here we're
other
back.
things he's thinking about.
He got all kinds of stuff he's thinking.
He does. He does. So we're glad to have Nathan back
I'm glad to be back.
from his meeting.
Yes.
And I'm sure you figured everything out.
Yes. As all meetings go,
Mhm.
all problems have been solved.
Yes.
And
Yay!
yes. So we can move forward now.
I should
into
have
other
more
things.
meetings with him.
I know.
That's how they go. That's
That's
how
right.
all the meetings go. We
Mhm.
just wipe out the problems and everyone's happy. So.
Ed is back in his pink lawn chair.
And I love it.
I
Not
made-
a long,
I
it's
made-
not a long chair.
Well, that's what I called it last
Okay.
week. I made fun of him for being in his pink lawn chair.
Mhm.
And me and Nathan staying in the cushy armchairs.
Yes, this is
So-
nice. Mine's all torn up a little bit though. It's
Well,
an
we
old-
talked about
We
the
talked
fact
about how they were all yard sale
that
specials.
these are all yard sales,
I gotcha.
smelly. God knows what's happened on these chairs.
That's true.
That's
That's
for another-
that's
that's
we don't want
another
to find that
podcast.
out.
It
Yeah,
is.
I don't want to find that out.
What has happened on this chair?
hmm
What do I smell?
Ugh.
What is that smell?
So you missed Nathan.
Okay.
You missed Joel's question last week.
Oh, former producer Joel.
Former producer Joel.
Who
We had
listens now and then?
now and then. He says
Oh, that sounds right.
here and there.
when he
now
was
and then.
here, he only listened.
That's true. I bet he listens more now than he did when he sat behind
Yeah.
the camera.
He listens more now than then.
And then he then.
Yeah.
Then, then.
Than he did then.
We had
That's
a
true.
blast answering Joel's
I
question.
occasionally hear from producer Joel, and it makes my day. So I'm glad I'm
Well,
glad
it
he-
made my day that he had let us know he was there.
Yes.
It made our last episode.
Well, there
Yeah,
you go.
so-
We wouldn't had it without it.
That's right. But
And
as
people are thinking, are you going to talk about Joel for this whole episode?
no, we're not.
Who
That's it.
knows? This next question may lead us back to let's just talk about Joel.
Maybe. So we're going back to our original format, which is anonymous question.
Oh,
We have another anonymous question. So he or she who shall remain nameless, they want to know, what is the relationship between the brain and the soul? Good question.
I'm so glad I don't. Y'all always know the. I don't know. I would have said, hey, I got a meeting.
But there's more, so let me read the rest so it'll clarify. What's the relationship between the brain and the soul? What about persons with mental disabilities or brain injuries? What about people who become brain dead? What is happening in the mind/soul when the brain doesn't operate correctly? I cannot believe someone asked me and you guys this question.
Yeah, I don't know what qualifications we would have that they would
Wow.
think we would know the answer to. This
I'm
question.
honored.
So
that-
we're Bible
Sure.
people. I'll just say up front, there is nothing in the Bible that answers this question.
Good call.
No, yeah, that's
Yeah.
correct.
That is true.
That is correct.
So are we just going to make some conjectures?
Mm.
Well, so I think you said something before we started. Maybe we could start there. You said that you had listened to a podcast that was kind
Yeah.
of about this.
Yeah, tell them about
I
that.
did.
That's
There's a-
better than everything I have.
Yeah. And I'm gonna completely butcher this with so much simplicity, so bear with me. But the podcast is called "The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God." It's a guy named Justin Brierley who's been
Mhm.
investigating this idea. He wrote a book about it, but
and
did
he's
it.
British,
He's
so
British.
he's smarter
He's
than the rest
Really
of us.
sounds really smart.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was listening to.
You've probably seen him. I've never seen him. Does he look smart?
He's
too?
he's a short little man.
Yeah, he is.
Okay.
I'll say that.
You wouldn't.
That did not answer my question unless you have presuppositions about short
No.
means smart or short
all,
doesn't mean
all
smart.
I'm saying is, you said it. Have you seen him before? And I have. And I think the most distinguishing feature about this man is he's a short little man.
Okay,
All right.
that's it.
Other than
Okay.
that, he's just a white dude.
He is.
Okay.
He's just a white British dude.
But he has a really cool British accent.
He does.
He does.
And a very good podcast. I will
Oh, the
give him that.
podcast is good.
And he's
I
a
haven't
smart
listened
guy.
to this one, but he had an old radio show that I listened
Yeah.
to occasionally.
He's a smart guy. Anyway, he had an episode not too long ago about the idea that in the world of philosophy and physics, metaphysics, and all that stuff, there was a belief about a generation ago that by the time we reached today, someone would have figured out how the mind and the brain and the soul are all connected, or else they would have cleared the deck and realized that we're just a brain and it's just chemicals rolling around, and what we experience as consciousness is not really consciousness, and I'm already getting heady. But the idea that he brings out in this podcast is all the people who said that just a generation or even 10, 12 years ago are now changing their tune. Even the people in the secular world who believe that, or at one point believed that every thought you have is just a bunch of chemicals reacting,
Right.
and there's really no free will, are starting to come around and go, no, we think we're wrong about that. There's something else going on that we don't understand. We just have to say, we don't know what it is. And so he brings that point out to say that, maybe there is something maybe there is more to you than just your brain.
Yes.
Some people call it the mind or the soul. It's something outside of you that exists that's not just the chemicals that are firing in your head.
Right.
So I say all that to say I don't have the answer to your question, but I do believe I'm more than a brain.
Yes. And I do think, to your question of what, for brain dead people or people, I think you said with mental disabilities, right? I do think it's really important, because I think in Western Christianity in particular, because I just don't know much about any other form of Christianity, we put so much emphasis on your relationship with God being something in your brain, being something in your mind, that, for anyone who has a child or, someone you love with a learning disability or a mental disability, or has, they talk about someone in a coma or something in that nature, you really question at times, well, what could their relationship with God be like?
Yeah.
Because, so much of what Christianity, in American Christianity, is, do you believe the right things? And by believing the right things, what I mean is, do you intellectually understand the concepts that you need to? And there are a lot of people with mental disabilities, and from birth, the way they were born, are incapable of understanding those concepts. Does that then mean there is no hope for their relationship with God? And in the sense of you just used the example of body, mind, soul, right? That distinction, what does it then mean? And many people have even said what it means to be made in the image of God is something about our mental capabilities. Because people have even said that's what distinguishes us. That's what the breath of life is. It's the distinguishing between us and the animals is we have consciousness. We have this ability to understand ourselves. What about a person who was born without that? Are they somehow less in the image of God than another person? And so I do think these concepts are important to think about. Now, to get to the point of, can we get clarity of what's happening within the soul of a person? I don't know about that. And I would say, I know in the Hebrew mindset, the concept of soul is not what we mean by soul. The Greek form, the kind of Platonic, meaning Plato version, is what Jason was describing there, that there's this other me, that what the Hebrew Bible would refer to as your spirit. It's this thing that's intangible about me that makes me, we might call it consciousness. There's this other part of me that's different. The Hebrew Bible referred to soul as your entire person. It was all of you, your soul. When Jesus says, I just quoted it Sunday, but is it benefit a man? To gain the whole world but lose your soul. He's not talking about losing the spirit. He's saying you're just losing yourself.
You lose yourself.
You're losing everything about you that matters. So to say that is to say somebody can be a soul even without fully functioning mental capabilities. And then in that sense, God deeply loves their soul and can save their soul, even without the mental capability in their body, in their emotions, in their soul. They are still able to be they're still in the image of God and capable of all of those things, though they may not interact with God in the way that I interact with God.
Well, the person didn't ask us about where these people were with God. I think you're wise to go ahead and answer that, and intuitively maybe that's what they were getting at. Where I've always gotten with people on, and this may not be helpful, I'm way simpler than anybody that was on that podcast Jason listened to.
Sure.
Yes, me too.
And I don't understand even all the things that the two of you understand. But when I would answer questions like this to people, it really comes down to, like everything else, the character of God.
Yep.
And
Yep.
if I'm concerned about what I'm asking myself is, do I trust this God
Mhm.
to do what's right? And
Mhm.
I think where that gets confusing for people is this idea that my relationship and every other person's relationship with God comes down to their ability or my ability to mentally assent to something
Mhm.
Yep.
or to do something, that people say, well, faith without works is dead. So I not only have to believe it, I have to do things. But if I can't do either, then I'm really in trouble. No, none of us are saved by my ability to believe something or my ability to do something. Jesus is the one that saves us. And Jesus saves us. That's a complete sentence.
Mhm.
He saves us. In fact, years ago, I took a class in college, and it was one of those trick finals where you had to read the first statement, and the first thing was skip to the last page of this test and read the last question.
Mhm.
And if you just started answering questions,
Mhm.
you were going to fail the test.
Yeah.
And the last question was, what is God's plan to save humanity? And if you wrote anything other than the word Jesus, you also failed.
There
Mhm.
you go.
The answer was Jesus. And so I say to people all the time, in these really difficult situations, you have to decide, can Jesus be trusted?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Can the God he told us we could call Father, who is good to everyone, just and unjust, who forgives sins to 1,000 generations, can he be trusted to do what's right for a person
Mm.
who is different than we think should be able to contact him?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I know that I trust that to be true.
Mhm.
And I've just said to people, that's where your answer is going to be found to this question. You have to get to, can I trust that God to do what's right for this person or not?
Yeah. I think I find that people who get hung up in these kinds of questions, and I'm not saying the person who asked it is, but sometimes when people ask questions like this, in my experience, it has been because we get hung up on a vision of God that is very technical and legalistic and rules based and it's written right there, so God can't lie and he can't violate his own self, so if it's right there, then here's the kind of God he is. And so that means someone who doesn't have the ability to quote unquote believe
Mhm.
has to be left out of God's plan for some reason. And
Mhm.
it is, when I've said this before, it is taking what your interpretation of what God has said and drawing a box that you now put God in.
Right.
And so and it is our attempt to gain clarity for ourselves as to what God will do and what God won't do. But when you paint like that and you draw those kinds of boundaries, you find that it is a very disturbing way to relate to your creator,
Mhm.
because it causes all kinds of these kinds of fears and questions of, oh no, if that's the kind of God I'm dealing with, then what that must mean is, and then you extrapolate that out, and it is not a being that looks anything like Jesus.
That's right.
And so we have to not start there. That's why we say on this podcast all the time, we start with him.
That's right.
He is the revelation of who God is. And if I see Jesus in what I'm seeing, if I'm seeing God through the lens of Jesus, which is what we're taught to do, for me, it often clarifies some of these issues, or at least takes me out of the technicalities that I find myself in that box God into them. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does.
So
I think that's the right approach.
yeah.
So I really appreciate the question. Got us to have a good conversation about all of those things that we don't have an answer to.
Unfortunately.
But Jesus is ultimately the answer on the spiritual side, trusting in God's character and figuring that out. That's why I constantly have people that I constantly point to just that. you can't start trying to even read the Bible if you don't know the kind of, you have to go to Jesus and figure out, who are you talking about? Who are you
Mhm.
listening to? What's this story about?
Mhm.
Because there's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't make sense
Yeah.
until you know Jesus.
I think that's where a lot of our modern day, um, I wanted to say the word heresies, maybe that's the right word, but the stuff that we see and hear in our culture coming from Christians, I think a lot of those mean spirited, angry, legalistic, hardline, you know, boundary drawing approaches to Christianity start with, I read something in the Bible
Mhm.
and, well, there it is. It's black and white. It's right there. That's exactly what it must mean,
Mhm.
without doing what you just described, Ed, of setting that behind the lens of Jesus Christ revealed and who he is, and then seeing that. Like, for instance, I pray the Psalms every day.
Mhm.
Just on a rotation, I pray through the Psalms, and there's some stuff in there that, if I didn't have the lens of Jesus,
Right.
we talked about this before,
Mhm.
that I would read that and go, whew, man, that I'm really afraid of God,
Right.
or I'm really repelled by
That's right.
the God that I just read about.
Mhm.
But I've got Jesus first here. He's my advocate. Well, he sends the advocate. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Mhm.
I do.
He's my lens that I see everything through, and so I see that through the lens of Jesus, and it changes everything for me.
Mhm.
You know.
Yeah, if I wind up in a position where I am more generous, gracious, kind, grace filled than God, I haven't understood things. If I
That's a good
also
one.
think I have a better sense of justice and
Mhm.
how things should be done than God does,
Yeah,
I haven't understood God.
that's right.
Mhm. Or maybe those things either.
Or maybe those things.
True.
You're exactly right.
Absolutely.
That's a good point as well.
There's an easy way of reading even Jesus, which is
Mhm.
reading me into Jesus
Yes.
and
Right.
assuming Jesus fits comfortably into my interpretation of what grace is,
That's right.
or what I wish grace and justice would look
Right.
like, or what mercy and compassion would look like. And
Mhm.
I have found that when you just read Jesus, he's more surprising. He's not necessarily even easier to get a handle on. I think.
No, I agree with that.
I think there's a modern, and I think every generation has their own. I just think we have a very modern idea of what Jesus looks like, and I think everyone kind of fits that into what they're most comfortable with. And I think but when you just look at who Jesus is more gracious than you imagine him to be. He is somehow just as just,
That's right.
more just than you might think he would be. And it seems to be that Jesus feels all the emotions that, or even the uncomfortable ones. We don't, we always talk all the time about there aren't bad emotions, right? You
Mhm.
don't need to classify them as bad, but Jesus feels a wide range of emotions. And that's uncomfortable for some of us, of, Jesus being in the garden and
Being anxious.
being so worked up,
Mhm.
whatever words you want to use, but he says, my soul is crushed to the point of grief.
Yep.
And many of us are not comfortable with that concept.
Mhm.
We're okay with the Jesus who weeps before he's going to raise Lazarus from the tomb, because that's like this, I'm empathizing with you.
That's
And
right.
our culture really values empathy right now,
Yeah.
but not this, what for many of us we consider, well, that's weakness, to be crushed to the point of grief before you got to go do a job.
Mhm.
That's going to be tough. Just toughen up and go deal with it. And Jesus feels a wide range of things. All of that, I think, is complicated. And so to the point that Jason said, you've got to hold Jesus up first, right? And you've got to say, I can't even put myself before Jesus.
No.
And sometimes that's the harder part,
It
I
is.
think,
Yep.
is, you could make an argument that because you use the term heresy, the people who, and all of us do this, I've incorrectly, whether it's heretical or not, but,
Mhm.
I incorrectly read God.
Mhm.
And some of that's because I've read the Old Testament first. Some of it's just because I'm reading through my own lens.
That's right.
Yep.
I'm putting myself into what I expect Jesus to do or to be. And that's why we say frequently around here, you have to read it in community. Because what I often find is when I read with people who are older than me, they're bringing something to the table that I'm not bringing to the table. When I read with people, when I read, I read with my children, when I read with them, they have questions that I haven't ever thought of just because they have a very simplistic way of looking at these stories, right? Or when you read in the community of brothers and sisters of color, or you read with someone of a different gender than you, and all of that, people are bringing their own image of God with them, but their own also experiences and their own questions and and that helps us to interpret, well, what's Jesus actually saying? Because I assume Jesus was saying the thing I thought he was saying, but you have a completely different experience. That doesn't mean I'm right and you're wrong, or that you're right and I'm wrong.
Yep.
It may mean that we need to look at this with a more clear vision
That's
of what
right.
it is.
All right. So we got off track because, as we said in the beginning, we really can't answer that question. So I hope that at least gave you a better sense or framework with which to approach the question.
Yep.
So maybe that's what we provided today.
Maybe so.
Or you didn't, and we just completely screwed it up for you, and you need to ask more questions. Well, you can do that. Go into the description, click the link, send us more follow-up questions or some completely different. We'll take a stab at that one. But either way, we'll see you next time, and we'll have more questions. Bye.